Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Wong, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. This is a place where you'll be guided to living your most aligned life so that your truest, most radiant self can emerge. We'll be jamming on topics ranging from spirituality, entrepreneurship, to wellness and lifestyle design, and everything in between that can support you to grow, evolve, and shine, all the while not taking ourselves too seriously. So if you're ready to step into your leadership, break through limiting beliefs, own all of who you are, and expand in abundance, grab yourself your faith cup of tea and let's dive in. Hey, welcome to the final interview in the men's series. Today's episode is a men's panel, and it's actually going to be split up into part 1 and part 2. And this interview / men's panel is actually a bonus episode. By the time I interviewed both Marcos and Teddy, I pretty much wrapped up the men's series, but I had such a great conversation with both guys after yoga class one day that I was like, you both need to come on and be part of the men's series. So it is a wonderful conversation. Part 1 is more around both Teddy and Marcos's experience growing up as men and their relationship to being men in the US. And part 2 is more around relationships with women. And I would say part 2 is a little bit more rated R. And so super fun conversations. I also forgot to ask the men to introduce themselves in the beginning, so you'll hear more about their background towards the end of part 2. But so you know who is who during the interview, I'll give you a heads up of who they are right now. So Teddy is the first one who speaks when I start the interview. And Teddy is in his early 50s. He is married, has 2 children. Marcos is in his early 30s and he's a bachelor. He also has a newsletter Substack account that if you want to learn more about his writing and connect with him, his link for his Substack is in the show notes. I really enjoyed talking to both guys. It was very heart-centered. We went deep and it was very fun conversations. So I trust there is something for you here. And if you feel called, please share this with someone who you think can benefit. Or you can share it on social media and tag me at michellewong.xo on Instagram. And yeah, without further ado, here is part 1 of my conversation with Teddy and Marcos. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the Sacred Emergence Podcast. Today's episode is unique in that we are recording this live in my living room with 2 amazing guys, and this is like a bonus because I finished the men's series and I was like, oh my gosh, you were talking after yoga, and I was like, you guys need to come onto my podcast. And so welcome Teddy Johnson and Marcos Del Valle. Did I pronounce that?
Not good. No, that's good. That's good.
No, I botched it. Del Valle.
Uh-huh.
Cool.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So well, let's kind of like set the scene. So yesterday after your class, we were just talking, and well, the conversation led to I was talking about like, I wanted to hold like breath work because I had this in my mind that like men, and I was talking about like the most privileged men, right? So like straight, white, American. And I was like, I feel like they can probably benefit from breath work because I don't know, like, and then Teddy, you said something about like your observations around vulnerability and like there's that opportunity. So I would love to hear your perspective. And I was thinking like this conversation is beyond just like, okay, like I wanted to hear from a woman's perspective about talking to white men, but I was like, this is beyond just white guys, right? Like these are just men who grew up in America. So I would love to hear both, Marcos and yours, Teddy's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I think it goes back to something I heard which I thought was the absolute most ridiculous thing ever. I think it was like a New York Times piece on these investment bankers in New York who basically were, losing their minds because they weren't getting their multi-million-dollar bonuses, right? And the situation was that, at first it sounds like, yeah, world's smallest violin, right? But then what you realize is that these people have just sunk themselves into debt and expenses that just meet the level of where they are, right? So they're supposedly like power brokers of the world, richest people on the planet, but they've gotten themselves into like yachts, and there's a staff, and the kids go to schools that, it's like $100,000 a year. And so they were whining. It was like uber rich, whiny white men. And you're just like, how are these people whining, right? Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that I was thinking about is that even people who are in positions that are perceived to be, powerful or in control, like they get zero sympathy. Like I'm going to have zero sympathy for some investment banker who was getting like a $5 million a year bonus, and instead it was like 100,000, or they didn't get it that year. It's like, give me a freaking break, but what it really means is that that person, no matter what they've got or what they had or where they are, like no sympathy, but in their mind, they're still struggling, right? And I think just men in general are just expected to just kind of step up and do stuff. So, I don't have like a $5 million a year bonus, wish I did, but there still often is very little sympathy, and there's very little expectation that men will talk to people about whatever is going on. And I think that's, Marcos, how we got into this. Like I realized I don't really have any men friends who don't talk about their feelings. And I have mostly women friends, and I realize it's because of that. Like I talk to people who talk about what's going on for them in their lives and their feelings. And it seems like it's not as common that men get to do that.
Mm. Yeah. Does that sound like that tracks, Marcos?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it resonates for sure. And yeah, I don't know, I was raised by a single mother and my older brother, and my dad just like wasn't really around too much in early upbringing. And I don't know how much that plays a role, but just like watching my mom go through like dating and going through like a second failed marriage and like kind of just like all this stuff, and just like really seeing it from her side, and her always being really open and really vulnerable with my brother and I about just like where she's at and how she's feeling and all these things. And even though at the time I couldn't really kind of make sense of all of it, it had really given me a sensitivity to just vulnerability and feelings. And likewise, as Teddy said, growing up, a lot of my friends were women and were female, and like because of that, just because I was just always used to talking about feelings, and even now, like, I don't know, I see it like most of my male friends are probably similar. And then there's like the offshoot of friends where we just like share like a hobby or something, but there's no real like depth in the friendship, and I feel like that's what being able to be vulnerable and talk about feelings gives you, is that depth and like that layer of or just like a deeper level of connection with your friends and your community.
Yeah, I think like that's the piece where that was what motivated me to do the men's series, because I was like, I feel like there's that block somehow. But also I feel like guys, from my experience, they won't just open up. There has to be a level of trust, versus women, like what just it's like, it's easy to just start like talking and chatting and then let the conversation roll. And so like, does the skepticism kind of radar go up when there's conversations around vulnerability, or like at what point do like hearts open?
Pointing hearts open.
Yeah, like for deeper conversations, because it's like how do you know, like if you're like at a basketball club or whatever, it's like, oh, I can't talk to these guys, like when it seems like most guys can benefit.
Yeah, I feel like I'm like hungry for it. Like I like especially in a setting like that, it's like you could see all the like the tough faces and all the like the closed off energy. And then when you see someone who is willing to have like more of a conversation, it's like, ooh, this person, And yeah, so to answer the question, I feel like it's not like a trigger where it's like, okay, now it's okay. It's like I'm always kind of wanting that.
I wonder if it's also kind of like a game of chicken, like who's going to say something vulnerable first, I mean, because people have feelings, right? Like all people have feelings. And, there's a lot of people just like, they just never talk about their feelings, like ever. And I have to say, I don't understand it, right? Like, how do you just bottle all that up? Because life can be a lot, and I feel like I've been really fortunate to have people around in my life who I can talk to, the whole like, hey, get a therapist. I'm like, I have been really fortunate to have just my parents or friends who I would tell them anything, and they're not trained. But fortunately, they wouldn't give me like crazy advice. But you know what I mean? Like, I think to not have somebody you could talk to about stuff I think that would just be incredibly isolating and just scary, and also, to your point, Marcus, it's kind of like, am I going to sit here and just like talk to this guy about this game and the game's going to be over and then I'm not going to care? Or should I have a conversation that actually will be memorable or that will matter? Like, I don't know. I think it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah.
Like having surfacey conversations.
I think so.
Yeah.
I don't do small talk.
Same.
Yeah.
The playing chicken made me think there's been just countless occasions where I'm like in a group of guys and like I'll just start saying like, oh, I feel this, this, and this, and like you'll see the eyes of like them all like kind of look at each other and like is it okay? Like there's this this reluctance, like, oh, who's gonna respond, who's gonna keep this conversation going, or should we shut it down? Like there's like this tension that kind of comes up, and usually it's fine and someone will take it, but there's just like this moment of like oh no.
It's interesting that you use the word chicken, like the word chicken, because at first I was like chicken and the egg, like what do you mean by chicken? But you're talking about like like
yeah, like who's chicken,
like to bring up something vulnerable. So I think that's interesting.
You know what? I'm just thinking about this because somehow in this conversation we're having after yoga, we were also talking about fighting, which is like a weird thing to talk about in yoga. But I've had this notion that like the stronger I am, the weaker I can allow myself to be. Right? So like so like if you were the nerdy kid who got beat up a lot, and Marcos, in your situation, that kid were to bring up something really vulnerable, they can very easily get kind of like just physically, literally pushed, right? Like that's the kind of thing guys would do. It's like, shut up. You just like push somebody. Like I'm a boy too, right? Like play rough, right? I could see that happening. But if there's no chance of that happening, and you're one of the tougher people in the circle, like none of the downside of getting bullied, that's not even on the table, right? Like there's no risk to you physically, there's no risk to you just like getting intimidated or whatever. So I wonder if that's part of it.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah, because I mean I don't know, just like the discipline of the martial arts, but also being able to knowing that you can defend yourself and stuff like this, it does give like a level of confidence. And like I'm not really afraid of pushback, and that's a really good point.
That's interesting because it's like with like other interviews I've had, there was talk about like I guess being more of the I don't know like more of the softer kind of like the nice guy where it's like maybe like a lack of respect versus like what you guys are talking about is like there's already this internal confidence and like physical strength, so it embodies that more of that masculine energy. And so it's like, well, there's that energetic backbone, right? So I think energetically, when you bring vulnerable conversations, whatever, to the table, other guys can sense like, oh, like this is someone I respect that I can have this conversation with, versus like you're saying that kid who's always beat up, it's like, go away. Like, I think there's a level of respect that is kind of inherently part of it that's maybe not spoken.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I also too grew up in a very matriarchal family, and in our family, using intuition to make a big decision was very well respected. Like, a lot of people just want to be all analytical, and if the numbers look right, they'll say, yes, that makes sense. But in my family culture, if somebody just felt like this is the right thing to do, even if they couldn't really articulate the rationale, it'd be like, yeah, okay. And so I think part of this too is just seeing that way of being as strength, like seeing openness with your feelings and just what's going on with you as a strength, like not as a weakness. I think for me, that's a big part of it too.
Yeah. I think it's also like because you came from that. So it wasn't like, it's like that internal belief of it. Yeah. It's really fascinating around like years ago, I went to like this, it was called like the workshop originally was called Understanding Men and Celebrating Women. It's created by Alison Armstrong, who wrote the book Queen's Code. And we had a men's panel. But what was really interesting is that there is like this inherent level of respect where the younger guys look to the older guys. And like they always like looked like when they were like the younger guys are answering questions, they would always look to the older guys to kind of like, did I get it right? Like, and women, we don't do that. And so I just think it's interesting, like there's this level of like respect for the elder in a way. And it was like when after the men's panel was over, like the facilitator, like she was like, did you all notice that? How like men, like they have respect for like, because it's almost like, I don't know. And I was like, oh, that's really cool because women don't do that. I think my point is like, well, the whole point of that workshop was really like understanding men versus like, we want men to be hearing women. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why aren't they understanding me? But like men think differently, they operate differently, and there's a good reason for it. I'm just curious, like, how does that resonate with the whole like the elder and like the respect? Because I feel like that's kind of the underlying.
I think that there's definitely codes, and I think there's also like a deference, and there's also a pecking order.
Yeah.
I had this really weird experience where, and I've just noticed I do this, I don't know why. Whenever I'm in a room of guys, like I figure out like, what's the pecking order? Like, who could I fight? Who could I fight? Like, this is just the weirdest thing. Like, I don't know why I do this, but I just do this. And there was a man who's trans, or they were, perhaps transitioning. But I think, they appeared to be, assigned female at birth, but had very much of a masculine presentation. And their presentation was masculine enough for me to put them in my pecking order calculus, right? And I have been so strongly trained, like you never fight a woman, you never hit a woman. And it was messing with my head because I could tell they were assigned female, but they were coming into my like fight pecking order considerations. And it was just, I was like, what do I do, right? But so that was like the most poignant, like alarm bell that like, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing? Like, why would guys go into a space and be looking to others or be thinking about like, where do I stand? Or if I do this, what does it mean? Like would I be looking to those older guys too? You know, like, why do we do it? I don't know. So maybe the need is for guys to understand themselves. Like, why do we do what we do? I don't know.
Yeah, your story, Michelle, made me think of like why those younger guys were looking to the older is just like the father figure, you know. It's like we're always looking for, or I won't speak in like super generality, but at least I see it a lot in my generation, but there is like a lack of like strong father figures, and like there's always this like um I don't know, this like desire or this need to have that like approval from like an older male, especially if you didn't get that a lot when you were younger. So, you know, I just think about those like younger guys in the panel, just like, did I do good?
Yeah.
You know, did I get the thumbs up? You know, they're just looking for that external confirmation and that father approval, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, like a pat on the back, you know, like I remember even at work, you'll hear people talk about, you know, everybody really liked that. Like I got a good pat on the back. And you're like, this is work. You should have gotten some money. Like
that's all you got.
But like a pat on the back was really, you know, like that kudos, that respect, that was really big, you know, like
That's, it's interesting because like I think like corporations, it's structured on like a patriarchal, like there's a hierarchy, right? There's a CEO and all that. And it's like, yeah, even talking about the reward compensation, I like how you said, well, you should have gotten money for that. But it's like, I remember when I was at like one of my, as you know, my corporate jobs, it was like we were in training and it was like compensation doesn't have to come just in the form of money. Like you could get like, how do you, like what resonates with you in terms of like accolades and feeling good. And a lot of it is recognition and validation. And also it's like, yeah, and the money. Like, come on, let's be real. Don't go, cheap on us.
yeah, but you know,
Yeah.
Accolades are cheaper.
Right.
You know, so they can get away with like, oh, you get the gold star, a little certificate. Like I remember I got stars in school. Like if you did your homework, you get like a star. And if you got enough stars, they would tell your parents that you got all these stars. And they're like, oh, here's some stars, you know?
Where's the candy?
I don't think we ever actually outgrow that.
Yeah.
You know?
That's really interesting. I feel like, well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole vulnerability piece and like not having the father figure per se. I don't know. There's something really interesting there because like this idea of this panel started when, or just the series started, because I had this belief like as men heal, then they can have support women, right? Like there's like more like, hey, let's all rise together. But it's like, I don't know, that's pretty deep of like looking, meeting, wanting. And I think it also goes back maybe in the caveman days of like, I don't know, like survival and like being able to support oneself. And then you're talking about fighting, Teddy, around like, can I like, I think that's an instinctual thing.
I remember, I'm just thinking as you're saying this, I remember being taught how to not cry.
Oh, interesting.
And you're nodding too. Okay, we've never.
Yes.
No, I haven't. That wasn't a thing.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, for me, I remember I was like 8, 9, 10. It's like, how do you not cry when you get hurt, right? And it's not even taught to not cry. It's so presumed that a boy shouldn't cry that it was like older brother, oh yeah, well, or friends are like, yeah, I just get angry or I get da, da, da. And I remember a group of us talking about like, what are your strategies like to not cry when you're hurt?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's definition of like toxic masculinity, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you not honor your feelings? That's really hard.
Yeah.
Because that's suppression and then it comes out as anger.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember actually it was in my early 20s. Oh my gosh. I remember I was watching Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, that's a great movie.
In the theater by myself. And I was just like, and I started tearing up and I was like, that's the first time I cried in like 10, 12, 15 years.
Wow.
And I was like, what does that say?
Mm.
You know?
Mm.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of like suppression, and I don't know, when I was like really young, I was like super emotional and like very crybaby. But yeah, as I got older and just I don't know, just through like the world around me, you know, and even my older brother and stuff, it was just like that's just the norm. And you know, and when I would see my dad, it was always like very I don't know, like he always just had like this very like stern, just like very like solid base. And I've only ever seen him cry one time, and it was when my grandma passed away. But it was just like so little, like it was just like just a couple tears, and that was it. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It's just like yeah, it's just like embedded in the culture, just to not do that, and to not like, especially in public, you know. And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
How does that make you feel? Like to like not be able to cry in public. Like what is that? Like
I mean, it's kind of
curious.
crazy, right? Like you think about it. I mean, eyes want to tear up. Like, I mean, even just physiologically, it's kind of messed up that you're shutting down this system and like natural response. And then the fact that you're constantly like maintaining it, right? Like you're constantly keeping it at bay, or like you make sure the training has been deep enough so it never happens accidentally, right? Like, I mean, it's like emotional constipation, you know?
Yeah, totally. And it causes a lot of like short-temperedness and
Yeah.
like, you know, a lot of like rash, just like actions, you know, and
Yeah.
you know, this like could be like the source to like the first thing that popped in my mind was like domestic violence
Yeah.
and just like violence of any kind, right? It's just, you know, it's all this stuff that's just pent up, and then like one thing kind of like tips things over, and then you're just like want to explode because you have years, like so much time of like just so much stress just built up, and you know, you just like want to explode.
It's interesting that you said emotional constipation because that's something I never even really like. I would never use those terms. But as I was writing this copy for Breathwork, I mean, in this class, it's all guys. They're reading my copy. And like, I'm like, you guys are all guys. I don't think my copy is for you. Like, I'm thinking that because one of the guys offered emotional constipation. I'm like, I would never use that. But you used it. And so is that pretty like common?
Just to suppress.
Yeah. I mean,
I was saying, like, how many, like, we all need laxatives? Or like,
I mean, emotional laxative.
yeah, emotional laxatives.
Yeah.
That's what you should call your thing, emotional laxative, laxation.
oh, that's so
Like your therapist.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my gosh. That's hilarious.
How do you start crying again? I mean, you know, really, I think that might be, I think that's something that a lot of guys could relate to, is that you just don't see guys cry. And whether they feel that way or they don't, whether they subscribe to it or not, like I think that's, people would relate to that, you know, and just why, or how do you make it possible to cry again?
yeah, that makes me think. I don't know. For me, you know, I've always been, again, not wanting to speak in absolutes always, but for a long time, it's I've been in touch with my feelings, and I'm like comfortable with myself enough to where like I can cry, but I physically like can't. Like it's like it is hard, and it's like when I feel the need to cry, I like really have to force it out, and even then, sometimes it still doesn't come out. So it's just like it is blocked, you know. And
I felt this, like, if it coax it out, like you're like, no, it's good to cry.
like yeah,
like,
it's okay, yeah.
This will be good.
And it's like I know that, but it's just like it's still there, and I don't
Yeah.
know if that's just like it's just how deep that cultural
wow.
thing is.
But what woman would support that, right? Like, I think as enlightened as I want to think I am, right? Or it may sound because of the things I'm saying, right? Like I still would have in my head, what woman would support that, right? Like, would I feel, what woman would I feel I could be with and they would support that in a way that would make me feel safe and cared for and comforted, to actually be the one to encourage me to cry, right?
That's really interesting because I was, Brene Brown. She wrote Daring Greatly. So she's a therapist or a psychotherapist. Anyways, she's done a lot of research, and she writes a lot about vulnerability, and she has like this TED Talk that went viral. But I was listening to one of her audio books or just audio talks, and she was saying how she was at a book signing, and the woman loved all the books, and she was with her daughter and husband. And then, so, Brene signed the book, and the husband kind of hung around after, and the wife was like, come on, let's go. And Brene was sitting there, and she was thinking, oh my God, like, please go, please go, please go. Because she knew like the husband was wanting to say something, and he wouldn't. So like he said, it feels like when you're writing about vulnerability, it's all for women. How about men? And Brene was like, oh, that's easy. My work is for women. Like, I don't do men. And he's like, well, that's really convenient because my wife and my daughter, they would be so crestfallen to see me fall off the white horse. Like, there's like, he is put on this, like,
But I wonder if that's like projected or if that's real. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that goes to like, but it's interesting because what you were saying, Teddy, around like, is it safe, right, for me to show emotion with a woman? And I think there is this underlying, like, we don't want our men to show vulnerability. So it's like, it's even upheld in not even just within guys or among guys, but like the dynamics of a relationship. I don't know, do you think that's true? I mean, I know it's all different, it's not a generalization, but
I'm kind of going through women I know, and I would say that there are some that it's true for and some that it's not. But I think it's very clear in the relationship, that it would be supported or not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I agree. I've like my closest friends that are like closest female friends, or just my most recent partnership. Even now, I would feel comfortable knowing that I'd be supported and heard.
Yeah, heard. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, "Gosh, I feel so heard when I talk to you."
Mm-hmm.
And it just blew me away. I was like, "Man, this we gotta hang out." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, just taking a break from my conversation with Marcos and Teddy to share that this upcoming Sunday, November 19th at 4 p.m. Pacific time, I'm leading a virtual breathwork group, and the theme is Breathwork for Clarity. If you felt maybe stuck, overwhelmed, wanting next steps in life or business, this is the place for you. Or if you just want to come and breathe and have your own intentions, that is very welcomed. And if you've never experienced breathwork before, this is a beautiful place to start. And participation in this breathwork for clarity, the payment can be applied towards Spacious December edition, which details are also in show notes and I'll talk about again soon. Anyways, we'd love to have you, and it is open for everybody, both breathwork and Spacious. Details are all in show notes, and now back to the show.
I also want to talk about consent, because that came up when we were talking yesterday, but it's like, if guys aren't getting the respect, if guys aren't being respected, then I don't know, there's this power over, right, in relationships, in romantic relationships. But even, I would say, outside of romantic, even in a working relationship, there can be a power over if guys aren't heard, respected, right?
Right. Yeah. If you don't have a voice, a strong voice,
right.
if you're doubting yourself, then it's oh yeah, you could just kind of walk over this person, or it diminishes any credibility, if you're not speaking with confidence and not just being really composed and confident in what you're saying in like the work setting. I could see that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can I touch on something
Yeah.
I think is related? I think it does tie into like queer. Like I've been trying to understand like what does queer mean as my kids are growing up and being able to explore who they are. And one of my friends was talking about, she's divorced now, but before she and her husband were divorced, we were talking about something and we were talking about, I thought, so her ex-husband's friend, I was like, oh gosh, the way they get along, it seems like they're gay partners or something like that. And she's like, oh no, he's not gay. I'm like, oh, you sure? I lived in San Francisco for a while, so I got pretty good gaydar.
Like
anyway, the husband. So then I was like, I don't know about the husband. And then she's like, what she said to me was, she's like, I don't know if he's gay, but let's just say there is a spectrum, right? There's definitely a spectrum. And I think that the white horse or these establishment of roles, I think it does force like this black or white rather than allowing people to be on a spectrum. And I wonder if, being able to explore, gender is more closely tied to an ability to be able to also explore feelings and connections with people and power dynamics, because, why does being male mean that you're supposed to be in charge?
Yeah.
Like, and I've seen this in groups too, especially at work, right? Like if there's like one guy and four women, like somehow everyone will defer to the guy.
Interesting.
Like there's some threshold, like if it's like 10 women and one guy, the guy will just be like one of the group, but like there's a weird imbalance,
Yeah,
I can like, why is that?
Yeah. Gosh, that's really interesting. Well, there's so many layers to like I think historically men have been like the breadwinner, the provider. So I think maybe like generationally, subconsciously, there is that like, like the husband brings home the bacon, which nowadays it's like that doesn't really, but there's still like I feel like I was talking about The Way of the Superior Man book yesterday, which I read most of it. I don't think you guys have read it, right? It's a little, I've shared in previous episodes, like what's his name? David Data. I mean, his voice irritates the shit out of me. It's very condescending. But a lot of people I spoke with they're in really healthy relationships. Like they're married, really healthy. They're talking about polarity, right? Like masculine, feminine, not necessarily like male, female, but like masculine, feminine. And the more there's polarity, there's more like electric charge. And where am I going with this? Oh, I think there's like expectations of like, if you're if you're more feminine, and that tends to be, in a heterosexual relationship, it tends to be the women, but not always. There's almost like wanting the guy to take the lead. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like I love it when a guy that I'm dating takes the reins. I'm like, thank God, like I don't have to keep like leading, like, and so there's something really potent and powerful, and it's like hot. And it's like, so I think it's not a black and white thing, because the guy has to want to. Yeah.
No, I like the idea of like the spectrum and just like, not being so black and white about it. But going to that point about I'm sorry, what did you just say?
When the guy takes the lead, it's hot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When they like the taking the lead aspect, like it's okay to be anywhere on that spectrum, but I feel like that may be like tied to just like I don't want to just say the role of the man, but it's also like biologically what happens, like testosterone, like the active energy, like it's expected biologically that we're going to be like moving forward and trying to like make things happen. And I think that's just like something that's ingrained, in like I don't know, thinking of polarities, there's like, I feel like male energy is more so like active, where female could be more receptive.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't agree with everything he said in the book, but I was like, this is very like traditional roles. So he's not talking about spectrum, like gender spectrum. It's very like, so I could see how not everyone would jive with it. But I just found it interesting because he was like, if you want to be like the superior man, right? Like obviously you got to do your work and not be afraid to die for the woman, because you have a deeper purpose. Like your purpose isn't your marriage, it's not to keep the wife happy or your partner happy, but you have a greater vision in your life. And I really liked that, because it's like guys need a purpose. That's what he's saying, that has to be bigger than himself, that he's willing to like die for that. Like, and I was like, whoa, that's very heroic.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to like the heroism with women too, because there's so much that women do that's also heroic, like truly heroic. And I think what you're saying, like I totally agree with. But I think everybody kind of has to be heroic, And with regard to the polarity, I do think to some degree it's necessary because it drives procreation, right? Like, because it doesn't make sense to procreate, right? Like it's just too much of a hassle. Like with the kids, and like it's just kind of a pain. But like if it was only rational, like it wouldn't have happened, because it's like on the face of it, it's really just a bad idea, But these polarities make it happen, like these energies, that draw people together, like trigger things, like make things happen,
For the sake of instinctual creating future generations.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the deepest like unconscious desire. It's like it's just survival, right?
Yeah.
It's just like me getting my seeds to survive.
Right.
That's goal number one.
I was talking to this woman about, because I never understood women who thought that rich guys were hot. Because you see in a lot of movies, it's some like fat, dumpy dude who's got like the hottest woman on it. I mean, I'm like, this is just preposterous. And one day I was talking to one of her friends, and she's like, no, I think money is totally hot. But like the way she said it wasn't just like, hey, I want to go out to a fancy dinner. I'm like, I want to go out to a fancy dinner. But she was like, no, like I get aroused when I'm around a guy and I can tell that he has a lot of money. And I was like, okay, this is clearly a survival.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
he will provide for me.
It's the provider.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I get it. Because she meant it. Like, but I'm not that dude. So
do you feel like it puts a lot of pressure for guys?
if you don't want it, right? Like if you don't want to be that guy, or you aren't already that guy, there's definitely a misfit.
Yeah.
So I think that as long as she finds a rich guy, it's great.
Who
But
wants
if
to
you're
be a
not the
provider?
rich guy,
Yeah.
then it's bad news,
Yeah, it's definitely harder. But I think that is like I don't know, like a big push to just try to get rich, It's like,
Like from a woman's like get rich, marry a rich guy, you mean?
From like guy's perspective, just from like the average male, just like wants to get there, to have the status and the nice car and like the thing to show, to like it's the like the status symboling, right? Like having like the nice watch and like having the appearance of having a lot of money if they don't have a lot of money to spark that feeling, like, oh, this person can take care of me, and I don't think that's like thought out in that way, but it's definitely part of it, and even it's like culture and thinking about like a lot of music that's out and stuff, it's like it's all about like having a bunch of money and making it rain and whatever, but it's like under all of that, it is that just the, it's like if you have money, that means you have resources, that's house, shelter, food, and like you won't have to worry about that stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is a great like around I want to go into this topic. I think it's fascinating, like paying for dates, providing. So I have some thoughts on this, and also like me being a woman, right? Like being on the receiving end. I think there's a lot to say around receiving, and like if like I'll like yeah I'll if a guy wants to pay for me and it feels good, then I'll say yes. But I was listening to this podcast episode. This financial advisor was interviewing a male relationship coach for women. So he's a guy, but his clientele are women. And he's very well known. And this was like a YouTube clip that went viral of like this woman in that conference, right? They were paying to be in this thing. And the woman asked, how do I get my date to keep paying for me? And I know you guys are guys. And I'm listening to this. I'm like, oh, this is very interesting. Because I've always, like, when I go on dates with guys, I'm like, is there a point where, like, when do I contribute? Right? Like, I'm always wondering. And it's always, I'll be honest, it's always nice when the guy's like, no, I got you. Like, to be provided for. It's really nice. And his, like, so the coach's answer, the dating coach's answer, I was like, at the end, I agree with his answer, but I hate how he got there. So first he misunderstood the question. He thought, oh, I thought she was asking like, how do I contribute? But he's like, and then he realized, no, she's asking about how do I get more from him? Like, and so he was like, are you expect like in this type of dynamic, like, do you expect, like, would you offer him sex? Like, so like, I was like, wow, he went there, right? Like, because I think there's this expectation from guys, like, if I'm paying for you, then I'm expecting sex. Like, there's that type of thinking. And she was like, no, like, she was kind of offended by that response. And then ultimately, I know I'm looking at all your faces. Ultimately, he's like, look, like, if we're talking about like true partnership, then it's not like, then you have to think about the other person, what's in the best interest. And then it comes to a conversation. It's not like take. So I valued that response. But I also, from my perspective, I'll share, like, it's way more complex in a way, because culturally, women are not being paid equally to the dollar, right? We have like, you know, and if it's like, if you're a woman of color and the pay gap increases. So I'm like, there's a lot of complexity there. It's not, you know, but ultimately I agree with the partnership. Like, let's talk versus how can I get more. But I'm really interested in your guys' perspective, because that's a lot.
All right, so the conversation continues in part 2, where both Teddy and Marcos share their perspective and their opinions around my question in this context for paying for dates. So hop on over to part 2. Cheers. To help you feel more supported and nourished in your body and nervous system, you're invited to download the free I Am Supported meditation in the show notes. May you feel grounded in who you are as you become the fullest expression of yourself. Thank you for listening to the Sacred Emergence podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and thank you in advance for sharing with those who can benefit. Until next time.